a little bit about things that make pictures better that we don't necessarily think of very often. One of my favorites is to talk about filling up your frame. Now, if I go to this first photo here, we'll see a group of students standing right outside College Park, and you could say this picture is of this woman right here. Yet, we have all these other people in the background. If we are to call this a photo of her, what we would want to do is fill up our frame with her, like that. Now, it's essentially the same picture, but her face, her image, takes up a lot more of the screen real estate than in this frame. Like I say, it's arguably the same picture. So when you think of being a photographer, we can think that one of our jobs is to basically use all the space between these four corners. Our job is to, make use of it. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 corners, and if our subject is this student here, let's use all of the real estate to make it a picture of her. So that's called filling up your frame. Here we go. Here's another example of this. Here's another student inside a classroom, and again, it's a perfectly fine picture. Nothing great or bad, anything. It's very neutral. But we don't use our real estate very well. We've got a lot of space here that, you could argue, well, it's a picture of the classroom, and we have pictures of the computers, so on and so forth. Well, if we fill up the frame with her a little bit more, here she is. So same picture, arguably, and the truth is, it's still in the classroom. You can tell that. We have computers back here, but it's a much cleaner picture of her, fewer distractions. And when we go back to the idea of pixels per inch, if you look at this picture, you could argue that, say, out of the 4,000 pixels across left to right, only 300 or 400 of them make up her face. Whereas you go to this frame, and maybe a few thousand pixels make up her face now. So as we enlarge or do effects to this picture, this one will technically hold up a lot better. And the key difference is that we just filled up our frame. Now, watching our backgrounds is always really an important deal too. Here's another student. This is outside College Park, and you'll notice that I have selectively focused on her face. Her hand is reaching out, but it's out of focus. But the more important thing is that the building provides a very clean background. Again, a real key issue here is to look through your camera and think, okay, I'm responsible for all of this distance between these four corners, and am I using it well? Let me go to another picture here. Here's another one where we have two other students, but I didn't look at the background that well. We have a palm tree coming out of her head and a pole coming out of her head. Now, it's certainly not the worst picture in the world, but as a photographer, that's the very first thing I see is, well, if you had just moved a step to the left or the right, you wouldn't have poles coming out of their heads. So it's a matter of paying attention to the picture you're shooting when you're doing it. These are things that, can you fix it in Photoshop? Sure, you can, but that's not a good use of your time. Okay, here we have another shot. Here's some students inside the classroom. This is a little blurry, a little out of focus, but it still works. Here we have our subject guy in the foreground, and we have him with less depth of field. Now, the difference between these two frames is that I'm shooting at an f-stop like f8 or 11, and that gives us more depth of field. Depth of field is a phrase that you want to memorize and know what it is. Depth of field is ostensibly the range of acceptable focus from your primary focal point. For example, this guy's eyeball right here is arguably the primary point of focus. It really should be this eye, but it's not. And Daniel back here is acceptably in focus, but he's not tack sharp. But you go to this image, really the same situation. This guy's sharper in focus. Daniel's way out at this point. Now, what the effect is that we isolate our foreground subject so we see him more clearly. And that's really kind of the point of knowing when to use selective focus or not. Remember this picture, I think it was? I have selective focus on just her. Everything else is out of focus. So that's a conscious decision I made as a photographer to isolate, or maybe highlight is the better word, the subject. So we have the person who is in focus, therefore our visual attention is on our subject. One of the lab assignments that I have done in the past is to identify if your camera, tablet, or smartphone has enough shutter speed to stop action. In this case, we have a student jumping in the air, and the shutter speed is fast enough so that he is frozen in air. We don't have any motion blur here. Here, let's see, here's another one. We're going to come back to this picture for different reasons, but we have one in here that is, oh, stop action bad. Yeah, there it is. Okay, here's an example of where the shutter speed is way too slow. Now, we're not really going to go into shutter speeds, apertures that much in this class, because frankly, there just isn't time. But when you set a camera on automatic, which is what most of us do these days, we are letting the camera make the decision as to what the proper exposure is. In this case, the proper exposure is a very slow shutter speed, which means that my shaky hands caused the image to be blurred. Now, if I was going to exert my control as the photographer, I'm in charge here, then I would override the automatic exposure, and I would actually take the picture like this and have a high enough shutter speed so that there is no motion blur. Now, that's pretty much what separates professionals from amateur photographers, is knowing when to put the camera on manual and when to leave it on automatic. All these other issues like filling up your frame and focusing your backgrounds, that really is a matter of just seeing pictures. Knowing when to take control over the technical aspects is what separates the pros from the rest. Okay, so back to here. Here's blurry. Here's that same group, not blurry. What happened here was that I might have changed my aperture or upped my ISO. There's three variables, ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So I changed one because I had to get enough shutter speed to hold them still, or hold my hand still. Okay, that's more of a technical conversation, and again, that's stuff really left for a photography course, not necessarily an image course in terms of visual communications. It's much more about how to take a picture technically and learning about a camera, which we're not really going to do here. Moving on. Here's a case where the blurred action from a slow shutter speed actually works in our favor. This is a guy washing a window at a place that's now, it's on Harbor Boulevard. It's a burger place. Anyway, it was a different business when I shot this picture. The location has changed, but yeah, I'm getting off topic. But here's the deal with this. In this case, the slow shutter speed helps make the picture work because you get a sense of action and blur. Now also, here's a little bit of an aside. When I look at this picture, I can see that there's not really a good black in here. This is something we'll come up with in the next few videos, but I want to just make this look better, so I'm going to go in and go to my image adjustments and levels, and I want to make the blacks black. So I'm going to make the blacks black. And there. Now, doesn't that look better already? Let me make the whites white. The levels adjustment, that comes up soon, but makes a big difference, doesn't it? Okay, moving on. We have, let's see, we have good light, bad light. Here we have, here's a student who's shooting a picture here, and we're kind of doing that camera face-off. Now the thing is, the light behind her is causing some flare in my image, but the truth is, I kind of like it. It looks good. You could argue that, oh no, that's terrible, that's a mistake. And, well, that could be technically true, but the look of it is okay. So the intent And as I said before, knowing when to override your camera and when not to is usually the mark between a pro photographer and an amateur. And again, what you want to do is really be in the moment. Think about these things while you're taking the picture. Here again, I can do some levels adjustments and actually make this a whole lot better. Doesn't that look nicer? Oh, night and day, night and day. That's another lecture. All right, moving on. We've got frame your shot. Oh, look at this. Here's another student. And this is something we do outside walking around when we cover shooting pictures in 317. But here are the students. I think this is like one of those benches outside College Park. Here's the hand of the photographer shooting her picture. But this is kind of the selective focus that I've talked about before, where we use other things that are out of focus to frame the subject of our picture. It's a technique, framing. Finally, we want to see everything. Now here's another picture. You know, it's someone taking someone else's picture. No big whoop here. But here's the other picture that happened here. It's the see everything moment. So now seeing her picture being taken in this phone, now that becomes a little more interesting. Now it's a picture like this comes from being aware of the situation, paying attention to the dynamics of the people, what they're doing, and frankly realizing, you know, you can take a picture of people standing there, or you can try to come up with a creative or different way of seeing the picture. So there's a lot to do with this, and so much of it for this basic part of photography is a matter of being in the moment. Thinking about what you are seeing in your pictures. We've got 4 corners here. What's happening? How are you using them? Maneuver around to get the most real estate out of it. Oh, I was going to come back to this picture. Now this is kind of a funny picture because when we do our B movie poster, we're going to be cutting out a person from their background. Now this is a brutal, brutal background to cut someone out from. Now I'm going to go ahead and just crop this a little bit just for the sake of doing it this way. You can see that I can isolate him a little bit more, but he's still going to be really difficult to cut out because we have so many little shapes and tones of stuff in the background. That's going to come up with in our selection tools how we use them and why we use them. Regardless though, here we have good stop action. It's nice and in focus. It's a win from those criteria. Here's the other jumping shot. We have focus and background, depth of field, other focus and background. Watch out for those poles. A nice clean background. Filling up your frame, not filling up your frame. Filling up your frame again, and not filling up your frame. Now, ultimately, these things come with some experience, and, you know, there is no right or wrong. It is a matter of style and taste and what your preference is. But a lot of times, when you think of it, you've got a lot of space and a lot of image area to work with. And as you'll find as we go, resolution is important. So we don't want to use pixels, available pixels, for stuff that is going to get cut out anyway. So fill up your frame, maximize how you use your pixels, and you're going to be taking much better pictures. One of my old instructors used to say, you know, get close enough and then move closer still. All right, that's it. So we'll talk soon.